On today's episode of Culture Rewind, we're delving into Ted Bundy's childhood and early adulthood. Now, this will be part of 1 of 4, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next few videos. Today, we begin our journey in Tacoma, and we're driving to Bundy's old neighborhoods. We'll visit 3 of his childhood homes and high school, and then we'll visit University of Puget Sound here in Tacoma and University of Washington in Seattle. Now, I'm not going to go super in depth on everything that happened in Bundy's childhood, but I do want to give some background on him as we visit these locations. So I'll start from the beginning. Ted was born in 1946 to Eleanor Louise Cowell at a home for unwed mothers in Burlington, Vermont. Now, Eleanor went by her middle name Louise, so I'll be referring to her as Louise. Now, back in the 1940s, it was a time when having a child outside of marriage was really frowned upon. And we don't have confirmation on who his biological father was, but we do know that for the first 3 years of his life, he lived with his maternal grandparents in Philadelphia. They actually raised him as their son to avoid that social stigma that was attached to having a baby outside of marriage. So for years, he believed that his biological mother was his sister. And there are many discrepancies as to when he actually found out the truth, but some reports say that he found out as late as 1969, which would have made him 23 years old. In 1950, Louise decided to move with Ted from Philadelphia to Tacoma, Washington. And they moved into her uncle's house here on South Alder Street while they got on their feet. Interestingly, Ted really looked up to his great-uncle from a very early age. He was a professor of music at a local college and gave piano lessons to students from his house. And he was successful in many aspects of his life. Ted saw that, and he aspired to be like him. Shortly after making this move, Louise met Johnny Bundy, and they married about a year later, and Johnny officially adopted Ted as his son. They moved in their first family home together right after that, here on South Sheridan Avenue. Now, when we filmed here, it was the summer of 2023, and they were in the process of completely renovating this house. It looks totally different now. Now, it sold in January of 2024, and this is what the house looks like remodeled. It's actually pretty nice. Now, when Louise and Johnny moved over here, Ted was 4 years old, and they lived here for about 2.5 years. Bundy would later say in an interview to an author that he liked living here and remembered adventuring with his friends around the neighborhood. After his half-sister was born, they decided to move to what would ultimately become Bundy's last childhood home on North Skyline Drive. And he would reside there for about 13 years. And on our way over there, I'm going to talk a little bit about how during these formative years at this house, Ted began pursuing things that would ultimately lead him down a path of utter destruction. When recollecting his teenage years, Bundy's accounts of things contradict themselves, and that was a really common theme with Bundy. He would tell one person something, and then another the complete opposite. For example, Bundy told journalists that he roamed around his neighborhood late at night looking for pictures of naked women in the trash. Then he told an attorney that he was actually looking for detective magazines that involved sexual violence, specifically ones that contained illustrations of dead or mutilated women. He later then told Ann Rule, his previous coworker and author, that he, quote, never ever read fact detective magazines and shuddered at the thought that anyone would, end quote. Nonetheless, there were other recollections of Ted in this neighborhood that were quite disturbing. One of his neighbors alleged that he engaged in animal cruelty. She also alleged that he would terrorize the other kids in the neighborhood by taking them into the woods, having them stripped down, and then he would take their clothes away. He also told a journalist that he would drink a lot of alcohol, and then he would walk around his neighborhood at night to watch women undress. Just really creepy, bizarre stuff. But here is his final childhood home on North Skyline Drive. 2 years after Ted moved out, his parents sold the home, and it's changed ownerships multiple times since then. In 2017, a man purchased this home to renovate it and flip it, and the contractors he hired believed it was haunted. They reported that furniture moved, cabinets opened on their own, and the words "help me" appeared inside the home on a window in the basement. And interestingly, Ted's bedroom was in the basement. The contractors said that they penciled Bible scriptures on the walls and brought in 2 pastors to bless the house. Now, there is no evidence that Bundy killed anyone while living in this house. In fact, his earliest documented murders began in 1974, which would have been 8 years after he moved out of this house. And we're going to go in depth on those in our next 2 videos. But after Bundy's capture in 1978, an old case would receive renewed attention here. And we're heading over to that location now. When Bundy was 14 years old and living on Skyline, an 8-year-old girl named Ann Marie Burr disappeared from her home right over here in the middle of the night. A size 6 shoe imprint was found at the scene, which led investigators to believe that a teenager was involved in her disappearance. Now, it was long believed that her abductor could have been Bundy because he lived only 2 miles away from her home at the time, and he delivered newspapers in her neighborhood. And some people say that Ann Marie knew Bundy from his paper route. But years later, the investigation wouldn't lead back to Bundy at all. And unfortunately, her whereabouts still remains unknown. We are here at Ted's old high school, so let's talk about his social life a little bit. Back in high school, he described himself as choosing to be alone because he had a difficult time understanding how interpersonal relationships work. He said he wasn't a social outcast or anything, but he didn't like to do social things. However, his classmates told Ann Rule that Bundy was actually well known and well liked by the other students. And while in high school, he did develop an interest in downhill skiing, and it's been said that he would practice by using stolen equipment and forged lift tickets. He would graduate from here in 1965. Now, when Bundy went here, the school was called Woodrow Wilson High School, but in 2021, the name was changed to Silas High School. And what's really crazy is that a lot of famous people went to school here. Many NFL players came from here, so I'm guessing they had a decent football program. They also had a couple of Olympic gold medalists graduate from here. But most interesting to me is Jeff Tate, the lead singer from Queensryche. Tate was always interested in music, but he originally wanted to play football. Fortunately for us, a knee injury prevented that, and he went on to pursue music. Now, when it comes to Bundy's college education, he would enroll in many different schools and then drop out and go somewhere else. University of Washington was his most consistent school that he would attend. And we're going to head up to Seattle, but we're making a quick stop here at the University of Puget Sound. So, after graduating in 1965, Bundy attended school here for 1 year. It's been said that he lived on campus here, as well as at his parents' house, so it's a bit unclear to me. But for reference, Ann Marie Burr's house is just down the street from here. It is literally 2 blocks away. In the fall of 1973, he did come back here to take night classes for law school, but that wouldn't last long. We are at McMahon Hall at the University of Washington. Bundy transferred here originally to study Chinese. While going to school here in 1967, he met fellow classmate Diane Edwards, and he would become romantically involved with her. They actually met here at McMahon Hall, where he resided. He would later describe Edwards as, quote, "the only woman I ever really loved," end quote. And I'll tell you a little bit about their story as we drive through campus. So after about a year at the University of Washington, Bundy dropped out and he worked a series of minimum wage jobs. Meanwhile, Diane Edwards had graduated around that time and moved to San Francisco. Bundy actually got a scholarship to study Chinese at Stanford that summer, and he went out to see her. But later that summer, Diane ended their relationship because she was frustrated by Bundy's immaturity and his lack of ambition. And there's a lot more to this story with Diane, and we'll talk about it in our next video. But at the time of the breakup, Ted was absolutely devastated. He did some traveling and ended up back on the East Coast. And it's believed that at that time, which would have been around 1969, he discovered the truth about his mother by getting a copy of his birth certificate in Burlington. Eventually, Bundy made his way back to Seattle in the fall of 1969. More motivated than ever, he re-enrolled at the University of Washington and met a young woman who would eventually become his long-term girlfriend, Liz Klepfer. Liz also went by Liz Kendall in later years. But he would become a father figure to her daughter Molly. And after graduating with a degree in psychology in 1972, he would work on various political campaigns and begin law school at the University of Puget Sound in the fall of 1973. But underneath the surface of a seemingly happy, seemingly promising, stable life, Bundy was plotting his ultimate revenge. And after playing a long game, D-Day finally came. And young women, well, they began to disappear around the Pacific Northwest. In our next two videos, we'll dive into Bundy's reign of terror in this state. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. You won't want to miss it.